Imagine this, you're in the comments of your favorite fantasy forum and someone just said top-down world builders produce better worlds than bottom-up world builders. Immediately the fight is on, everyone absolutely certain the other side is how you ruin a fantasy novel. I'm sure you've seen this exact debate, and maybe you've even been part of it. But here's the thing nobody in those discussions seems to remember. Your reader never sat in that comment section. They sat down with your book, and from that seat, they cannot see which direction you build from. They can only see one thing, and it's not the thing anyone's arguing about. Now, what nobody in those comment threads wants to see or admit is that they're not actually debating craft. They're declaring personal taste. The top-down writer loves the pleasure of figuring out how all the pieces connect before they write a single word that leans on them. Like why this river makes that city rich, or why that wall left this culture suspicious. It's a puzzle solver's high, this satisfaction of cause leading to effect, leading to implication, leading to draft on the page. You get where I'm going with this. Now, the bottom writer, on the other hand, loves dropping a dragon into the story because the dragon is electric, the coolest possible version of this scene, and they'll work out the logic later. Theirs is the adventurous high, the creative momentum from following something small first and then building outwards from it. Both of those are real pleasures and both produce real fiction. But neither of them is a craft law, and the thing I want you to hold on to for the next several minutes is a single question. It's a test you can run on any world-building argument. Would a reader holding the finished book be able to tell, purely based on the prose, what world-building approach you followed? If the answer is no, and I'm going to show you that it almost always is, then the argument being had is about tribe, not quality. Declaring allegiance with either side is like wearing the jersey of your favorite world-building club. And to be sure everyone is on the same page, let's define those two sides fairly, because both camps usually define the other guy's position uncharitably, and that's exactly what makes this fight so intense. Now, as established before, top-down world building starts at the foundations. You work out the geology before the geography before the trade routes before the city before the culture, and the culture before the character. Everything is caused by something that came before it. So the world has internal logic because you build that logic layer by layer, and when you finally sit down to write a scene, the world resists you the way a real place resists you, with friction, with history, with rules you didn't invent on the spot. That's genuinely satisfying, and that friction produces specificity. When your character picks up a coin, you know exactly what that coin is worth, who minted it, and why the current government still uses the old dynasty's face on the front. The reader gets the detail without the lecture. Tolkien is the canonical case here. He was inventing Elvish verb conjugations and sketching out the deep time history of the Elder Days decades before a hobbit ever walked out a wrong green door. The Shire existed inside a fully formed mythological archaeology. When you read about hobbits going about their small lives, you're feeling the pressure of an entire Elder Age the prose barely mentions. Thousands of years of history sitting just off the edge of the page. And that unseen weight is exactly what keeps the world from feeling thin. The top-down writer walks into the scene already carrying the world. The reader feels that weight without ever being shown the load-bearing structure beneath it. Now, bottom-up world building, however, drops the big idea into the story first. There's a city that floats above the clouds because that's the most interesting possible location for the confrontation you've been imagining. Or there's a magic system that works on breath, because that image, the slow exhale that moves mountains, is what the book feels like in your head. The logic comes later, backfilled from one single idea. At its core, it's like the character moves first and maps the terrain as they go. That's quite different from the top-down approach, but it doesn't have to be less satisfying. Following the inspiring idea simply produces a different kind of specificity. The specificity of image and feeling and urgency. The sense that the story itself wanted to exist and you were fast enough to catch it. Pratchett's Discworld is a useful example of this energy. A world that literally rides on the back of 4 giant elephants, standing on a turtle swimming through space. And that is not a premise that came from careful tectonic modeling. That is a premise that arrived as an image, as a joke with cosmic weight, and then got backfilled with decades of social satire and remarkably consistent internal logic about how magic, death, and narrative causality actually function in a flat world. The turtle came first. Everything else followed the turtle. And by the end, the disc feels as lived in and consequential as any world built from the top down. because Pratchett was disciplined enough to let the image generate its own rules, rather than abandoning the rules when they became inconvenient. So neither method here is the lazy one. Neither is the beginner's shortcut. And here's the part that makes the whole fight a little absurd. A finished sentence of prose has no memory of how it was made. You cannot read a chapter and reverse engineer whether the author started with plate tectonics or with a dragon they thought looked cool. The direction is a fact about the writer's afternoon, it's not a fact about the book. The page does not carry that information. I mean, put yourself in the reader's chair for a second. Literally, picture the chair. You've got the book, you've got the words on the page, the feeling those words produce as your eyes move across them. That's the whole transaction between the writer and you. Everything else, the Scrivener folder, the spreadsheet of trade routes, the notebook with the magic system has 4 different draft versions, even the list of what technologies were used in the process. None of that is in the package you received as a reader. You're just getting the cake, you're not handed the recipe for how the writer made that cake. So here's something worth sitting with. Strip this style from a piece of writing and all you've really got left is a plot synopsis. The style is the book, which means the world building is in the prose, in the specific verb choice, in what the character notices when she walks into the market, in whether the city smells like salt or coal smoke or something stranger. The way you deliver that information is the world the reader walks around in, the order you build it in, the system behind the delivery, that stays home with you as the writer. And here's what makes this uncomfortable to sit with. Every reader has loved a world they'd be devastated to learn was mostly improvised. And we've all assumed their work was painstakingly systemized when the author was mostly just really confident while winging it. In good stories, often you simply cannot tell. I'm sure you could not tell about many of the books you love right now. Think about the Force in Star Wars. Now, that's not a novel, I know, but the principle holds perfectly and it's a great example. The Force is famously soft, barely ruled, defined mostly by vibes and a few gestures toward balance and the dark side. There's no Elemency-style periodic table of what it can do and cannot do. And yet, sitting in the experience of those stories, you feel an entire galaxy of spiritual weight behind it. Centuries of Jedi history and metaphysics that seems like it goes all the way down. That feeling of depth is real. It's just not coming from the elaboration of a system. It's coming from the specificity and conviction of how individual moments are rendered. The reader in the chair with the finished book has zero access to your construction method, and the construction method has zero obligation to reveal itself to the audience. Brandon Sanderson talks about what I call the hollow iceberg. The way it actually works for most professional writers isn't build everything and reveal some of it. It's build only what the story needs and hint at the rest in a way that lets the reader assume the whole thing is there. Get the details you actually use right, like nail them, make them specific and consistent, and the reader is licensed to assume you've gotten everything else right too. The iceberg feels vast because the visible tip is credible. The math below the surface exists primarily in the reader's imagination, which is doing the heavy lifting you get credit for. Think about what this means. If the reader cannot tell how much iceberg is beneath the water, they certainly cannot tell which direction you carved it from. The hollow iceberg argument doesn't just deflate the build more camp, it deflates both camps simultaneously. The measure of world-building depth in the reader's experience is not volume and it's not method either. It's the credibility of the details that actually make it to the page. The vastness of Middle-earth in most readers' heads doesn't come from reading the appendices. Most readers never touch the deep lore. They feel the depth because Tolkien's surface details are internally consistent and placed with precision. The name on a sword means something specific, the landscape has weather patterns. The political tensions that surface in conversations are the tip of something that feels real. The reader fills in the rest. They build the rest of the iceberg themselves, in their own imagination, from the quality of what you gave them. Which means two writers, one who spent 3 years building top down, and one who dropped a dragon in on one random day and worked backward, could produce surface details of equal credibility, and the reader would feel equal depth from both. So again, the felt vastness is reader built, not method built. But with that said, what does the reader actually detect then? Well, here's the counterintuitive part, the one I've been circling this whole time. There is one property of world building that reaches the page every single time. And it's not construction method and it's not volume of lore as we've already established. It's purpose. Does each piece of this world do a job in this story? Is it here because it earns its presence on the page? By challenging someone, awing them, revealing something, or putting pressure on something that matters to the story. You see, purpose is visible, process is not. And purpose produces its sibling, which is inner consistency. Tolkien's phrasing for this was almost mathematical. A green sun becomes credible only when the secondary world has the inner consistency of reality. He didn't talk about completeness, it was about consistency. A reader will swallow a green sun if everything else in that world holds together. And equally they will choke on a single coin that breaks the economy you've implied. A single inheritance law that contradicts what you established 2 chapters ago. Neither choking nor swallowing cares how you build the world. Both responses are entirely about whether the world holds together in the reader's experience of it. So the diagnostic flip I want you to consider here is to stop asking, did I build this the right direction? And start asking, does this earn its place on the page? That's the only question with a reader visible answer. Did I start top down or bottom up is a question about your afternoon. Does this magic cause something the reader understands and feels? That is a question about the transaction on the page. Only the second question lives in the same room as the reader. And if purpose is the only thing the reader can actually see, then locking your story's purpose before you build anything is the highest leverage move available to you. That's exactly what my free fantasy story compass is designed for. Getting your logline and emotional promise nailed down so every world building choice, whichever direction you build from, has something to serve. Links in the description below if you want it. Now, I want to genuinely be fair here, because the process debate isn't entirely worthless. The direction you build in absolutely matters. It matters to you. It matters to whether you stay excited, whether you keep showing up, whether the work sustains this strange long-haul enthusiasm that getting a novel finished actually requires. So you should pick whichever method keeps your hands on the keyboard. Pick the one that makes your writing and world-building sessions feel like momentum instead of dread. That's the whole debate's one genuinely good point, and it's a real one. The writer's process is the writer's private engine, and protecting the engine means protecting the book. When writers and critics push back hardest against elaborate world-building, for example, listen to what they're actually complaining about. Worlds so overstuffed they numb the reader, so crowded with invented detail that there's no room left for the reader's own imagination to do any work. Every one of those complaints is about what the writing does to the person holding the book, and what they're really describing has a name: world-builder's disease. It's a writer who spends 8 months perfecting a dead language in a 3,000-year dynastic timeline, and somehow never gets around to writing the actual book. But here's the thing I want you to notice. Worldbuilder's disease has nothing to do with direction either. You can catch it building top-down, lost in the tectonics for a year, and you can catch it just as easily building bottom-up, drunk on cool ideas you're never going to use. The sickness of worldbuilder's disease was never which way you build. It was pouring a time into the part of the world the reader is never going to see. So here's what falls away once you really take all this off the board. If the direction never reaches the reader, and the volume of lore never reaches them either, then a whole category of worry you've been carrying just got a lot lighter. All that energy you've spent defending your method to strangers, or feeling vaguely guilty that you don't even have a proper method, or hitting refresh on a thread to see if anyone clapped back at the tectonics people, you can set that down. None of it was ever going to reach a single reader. It was friction you were generating for yourself in a room the reader never enters. And what you get back in the trade is better than relief. You get one good question to spend all that reclaimed energy on. Not, am I doing this the right way? But instead, is this piece of my world actually doing a job right here? That question actually holds value. It'll cut lore you're in love with, and it'll rescue a scene you were about to bury under 3 paragraphs of backstory. And unlike, which direction did I build from, it's a question your reader can actually feel the answer to, which is the whole game. And to be honest, most writers do use both anyway. You cannot really do either in pure form, because the moment you drop a cool dragon in, you immediately start making decisions about what it eats and why that matters and whether the economy accounts for it, which is just starting top down from a different entry point. The methods bleed into each other because neither is a closed system. But beyond acknowledging that you're likely going to use both approaches anyway, stop grading them. The grade belongs elsewhere. The grade belongs on the page, on whether the details you chose are internally consistent, on whether each piece of the world is doing a job in the story, on whether the reader in the chair feels depth and consequence and belief, or feels the hollow wobble of a world that doesn't hold together under pressure. That's what's worth your energy. Not defending the method in a comment section. And if the only thing your reader can actually feel is whether your world is doing a job, then the smartest place to spend your effort are pieces of the world that do a lot of work. And honestly, few things pull more weight than a political system. When you get it right, it stops being background you have to explain, and it starts generating your plot for you, forcing your characters into impossible corners just by trying to live their lives. I dug up 7 real historical systems strange enough to do exactly that, including one system where ruling started with executing your brothers, and another where the surest path to the throne was found in the slave market. So watch this video next, and steal what works for your story.